Welcome to the Agronomy and Farm Management Podcast. I'm Amanda.
And I'm Elizabeth. Thanks for joining us today.
Welcome back to the Agronomy and Farm Management Podcast. Last week, you got to meet Dr. Horacio Lopez Nacora, who was sharing everything he knows, well, maybe just a slice of what he knows about soybean foliar diseases. As we're entering August, this is the time of year where, as we're driving by our fields, things start to mysteriously perish, especially in those soybean fields. You start seeing those sections, those holes pop up where you wonder what is killing those beans. And so Horacio is back with us today to talk about solving that mystery, because there's a few options for what may be the villain in those spots in your fields. So, Horacio, do you want to set us up today with what we're going to cover?
Yes. Again, thank you for having me here. Very, very happy to come and talk about soybean diseases. You're right. So, end of July, August, that's where our soybeans start telling us, I'm sick. Something's not right with me. And that's where we want to park our trucks, get off our truck and walk those fields and try to go to those places where we're seeing plants that are not looking healthy.
Historically, when we see those patches, I think most guys are going to think, oh, I've got SDS. We've had, I think, really a textbook season setting us up for SDS with a lot of these plants having wet roots earlier in the season. But you're here to tell us today that it might not be SDS.
That's right. So today we're going to focus on the soil-borne pathogens, right? Soil-borne pathogens are those that once that they infest your field, once that they are introduced in your field, you're not going to get rid of it. You have to live with it. You have to manage it. And these include soybean cyst nematode, the fungus that causes sudden death syndrome, SDS, and then, unfortunately, an emerging disease in the north central region that it's called red crown rot. And that's where we're going to focus today mainly, and we're going to use that as our pivoting disease for the conversation, and then we're going to also talk about SDS and SCN, but let's focus on red crown rot for this session.
So you've had a couple corn newsletter articles out about this in past years. Red crown rot, still relatively new for most of us. So can you start with maybe the history of this disease?
So the disease is caused by a pathogen that is called Calonectria ilicicola. And it's not a new disease in the United States. In the southern states, it was pretty common, affecting peanuts in areas where United States plant peanuts are very common.
You better watch out for your peanuts, Elizabeth.
I know. I'm going to go home and check.
And it's a very susceptible host. We're going to talk about a broad host range that these pathogens have, unfortunately. But, it was recognized as one of the many diseases in the southern part of the United States, but never seen in the north central region, in the Midwest. In 2018, however, Illinois has its first report. And soon after, different counties started showing up these diseases, or the soybean pathologists there were identifying and corroborating the disease in other counties. Now, before we talk about the transitions to other places where it was discovered, the way that it started showing up, and this is very untypical for a soil-borne pathogen. Normally, you will expect that the progression is very continuous, right? If it shows up in one place, then the neighboring county may show up, and then so on, and the disease area will enlarge. Very sporadic. It will show up in one area, and then multiple counties away, bam, another report. And this is something that lets us think that we may have been missing an accurate diagnosis in other parts. So we may have been calling it, oh, I have a little bit of SDS because symptoms are similar to SDS. No, you actually had the beginning of an emerging disease in your field. We're going to talk about that this disease also causes symptoms that resembles diseases that we have been very well trained to identify. Phytophthora. So all of a sudden I see plants dying, 90 degrees branching, discoloration in the base of the stem. That's Phytophthora. Oh, I have a little bit of Phytophthora. No, actually, that was red crown rot. Or charcoal rot. caused by Macrophomina fasciolina. The charcoal rot completely dries the plant. All the leaves stay attached to the plant. No, it was actually red crown rot that caused a significant root rot that dried the plant very quickly. So that takes us again to square one, where diagnosis plays an extremely important role here. We need to not assume that we can identify and diagnose this disease from the side of the road, from within our track. We need to get out there and actually look very carefully. Send it to our diagnostic labs. Land-grant universities like Ohio State have diagnostic lab. My lab is willing to help with this diagnosis. The plant clinic at OSU as well. So these are places to send samples.
Okay, so it started in the South, moved into Illinois. Correct. So where are we at in Ohio with
Correct. It? You're right. So we were walking historically through detection, Illinois, then we had Kentucky, Indiana, and then for the past 2 years at least, we have been alerting growers and agronomists through our corn newsletter that red crown rot was coming. We have a 2023 corn newsletter article where we, just showing a lot of the symptomology, alerting our community that we needed to be paying attention for this disease. In 2025, unfortunately, we identified and corroborate a case in Ohio. And again, if you see the map, again, we have Indiana with Ohio borderline where red crown rot have been detected. And this map can be easily found in the Crop Protection Network website. There are several tools in the Crop Protection Network website. One of them is disease maps. So you can go and find multiple diseases and where they have been reported. For example, in corn, we have the tar spot disease map. And for red crown rot, we have one as well. So every time that a field shows symptomologies and those symptoms have been corroborated through a land-grant university diagnostic lab, then those counties are light up. The fact that a county is highlighted doesn't mean that all the fields in that county have red crown rot, right? But that's where we identify and corroborate the presence of the disease. Interestingly, for Ohio, the first case came from Delaware, in the center of the state. And I mentioned Indiana border with Ohio, all those counties have been affected by red crown rot. So my guess was, well, probably the first report will come from that side of the state.
That's how everything else has come into the state.
yeah. And again, it just makes me think and makes me raise awareness that we may have missing it, right? Mm-hmm. We saw it in Delaware because the grower was very proactive in the way that, seeing those symptoms, knowing a little bit, learning a little bit more from the resources that we provide through a corn newsletter and other resources, sending those samples to the lab. We work with our private partners as well, so agronomists that work with growers, submitting those samples to the lab and then finally making that diagnosis.
So I think the next really important question is, when we talk about red crown rot, what are the yield impacts that you're seeing or we expect if this disease makes it into our fields?
So one thing that I need to mention here is that this is a pathogen that is a root rotter. It lives in the soil and it infects the root system and it starts rotting the root system of the plant. That's the first way that the pathogen causes significant yield reduction. It can also produce toxins that are translocated upwards that can cause leaf symptoms like the SDS fungus does. So the symptomology that we very, very well now we can easily see and identify on SDS, that same symptomology can be caused by the fungus that causes red crown rot. The fungus is not in the leaf. That's a toxin of the fungus that the fungus produces on the root system. But those leaves can then fall off. So we have defoliation, and that's another way that the plant can lose yield because it's such a good root rotter, because it's a severe root rotter. Depending on the degree and how and when it infected the plant, that symptomology that looks like SDS can be skipped completely. We can go from healthy looking plants to completely dried and wilted and dead plants. And all those leaves are retained. For some reason, those leaves are retained on the plant, something that doesn't happen with SDS. SDS normally prematurely defoliates the plant, right? We see the petioles there, but the leaves fall off when we are looking at SDS, sudden death syndromes. With red crown rot, depending on when the infection and how severe the infection is, then we can see complete dried out of that plant, skipping that SDS like symptomology. Now, I say that it's a very severe root rotter because in the literature, some of the symptoms are described as pencil-like roots. We have experienced SDS in Ohio. We walk out there to look at those plants affected by the fungus that causes SDS, sudden death syndrome. We see the interveinal chlorosis. Veins remain green. In between the veins, the tissue is yellow and then it starts dying. We split the stem to make sure that it's not brown stem rot, another disease that can also cause the same symptom. We know how to go and identify and diagnose SDS in our field. And we pull those root system out, and most of the time we encounter a resistance when we pull those plants. We can actually hear those secondary roots, breaking out when we're pulling that plant, right? In heavily affected areas with red crown rot, the plant just comes out very easily. There's no secondary root system, very severely rotted roots. And again, those plants that are completely dead, there's very little yield that can compensate, right? As a matter of fact, in a study where they went and they pulled pretty severely affected plants and compared to very healthy plants, they saw a yield reduction of 70%. Well, it was not yield. It was like components of yield. It was like numbers of pods, numbers of seeds per pot, etc. But we're talking about the extreme case here, where plants are
out
dead.
Of my chair, Horacio.
No, but rather than getting extremely anxious and stressed about, it's more we need more data to actually make better decisions. So what we did in Ohio when we went and identified this field is we threw an area, like a square, a rectangle actually. It was a 1 by 2 meters, so a 2 square meter rectangle, to create a quadrat where we could pull all the plants. Because that previous paper or literature that I'm talking about, those were pulling dead plants, so 2 dead plants compared to healthy plants. We wanted a larger area to be able to quantify yield, for example. And that's what we did. When we visit this farm here in Ohio affected by red crown rot, we went and we threw this quadrat in areas heavily affected by the disease. And then we tried to find the most closed and adjacent area where there was healthy looking soybean. So if you can imagine this, we had a paired situations where we had symptomatic and asymptomatic areas where we clipped all those plants, pulled all those plants, and we brought it to the lab. We count the numbers of pods, numbers of seeds per pot, numbers of undeveloped pods. So the pods was out there, but the seeds did not develop, if that makes sense. So you could see that there was a pod, but the seed failed to develop when we compare it to a healthy area just adjacent to these pods. We also rated for that root rot, and then because it was an area, we were able to quantify yield on average. And we did 10 pairs across 2 fields that were affected by red crown rot. So we had multiple reps, right? And we had this paired type of experimental design, if you may, right? And we were able to, on average, estimate that the yield reduction was over 35%. That's huge.
did they indicate that they'd noticed this last year, or it was just like, boom, it's here?
It was boom, it's here, but we know that's impossible. We know that the pathogen has to build up the population to get to the level where it can cause that. And again, this is where environmental conditions is so crucial as a component of that disease triangle. So soybean, a susceptible host, that's the first piece of the disease triangle. The pathogen that causes red crown rot, in this case, the second piece of the disease triangle, and the conducive environmental conditions.
Can you go into those a little bit more?
100%. So for the host, for now at least, maybe we will have more empirical data. Empirical data means that we go and we observe and we have some idea of how well cultivars are working in fields infested with red crown rot pathogen. But as of now, we don't have resistance to this pathogen. It's not that we can go on the seed catalog and find the resistance to red crown rot.
And that's mostly that we just haven't been screening for it necessarily. There may be varieties that have resistance, we just aren't aware that they do yet.
100%. And again, that just makes the whole research on red crown rot so important, right? First, we still need to better understand the biology of this pathogen and how disease happens, the epidemiology itself. Second, we still need to develop tools to allow us to screen for cultivars, for example. Commercial cultivars, why not? There may be actually some that show some partial resistance or moderate resistance. How can we screen it reliably to make sure that we identify those? And then working with breeders, same thing. How can we identify these resistant germplasm elite lines that then we can use to breed for resistant cultivars, right?
Yeah, because that could to some degree explain the jumpiness of where we're seeing it if we do have relatively broad resistance across the genetics that we're planting.
That's right. And we don't know that as of yet, right? So for now, we must assume that for that piece of the disease triangle, we're dealing with a susceptible host, soybean. We're dealing with a pathogenic, virulent pathogen. That's another piece of the disease triangle. It's moving around with the soil, so anything that moves soils will move the pathogen. We're still learning. Like in the past years, we have been working with our soybean pathologists, collaborators from other universities, states, sending debris from these fields to understand, is it moving on debris? How is it that it's spreading so fast? Just imagine, last year in Ohio, we reported for the first time. That same summer, 2025, Minnesota reported it, Wisconsin reported it. So it's jumping and it's moving. And for other states that have not reported yet, it's a matter of time, unfortunately. And then the third piece is the conducive environmental conditions. It's a pathogen that really becomes very severe under high soil temperatures. So temperatures between 77, 78, above even degrees Fahrenheit. So not our typical soil-borne pathogen. We talk about SDS caused by Fusarium virguliforme that normally affects plants when we plant in cool soil temperature, 65 degrees Fahrenheit. And that's where we see a lot of the symptomology. For red crown rot pathogen, it really takes advantage of that warm soil temperature. And you can think of, I didn't make it in my early spring planting, and then I have all these rains coming, and then by the time that I finally could go and plant, soil temperatures are high. Double crop, same thing. We're getting wheat off, soil temperatures are high. So these are things that will develop the symptomology that we're seeing.
And it infects the small plants or
yes,
at
so
any time?
That's a great point and segue here. Where do we see it? How do we go and scout for this? We can see the symptomology during the vegetative stage of the plant, so before flowering. We really need to go and down to the crown area. That's where we're going to see most of the symptomology. Is a root broader, but in that base of the plant, in the crown area, the stem will be discolored. It will be a reddish discoloration. That can be seen very early. It can also be confused because other diseases like rhizoctonia that causes rhizoc can also cause the same type of symptomology at that stage. During the reproductive phase, R1, R2, R3 on, we will see most of that leaf symptomology as well. So the crown area will be affected, but the toxins produced in the root system will be moved upwards and create that symptoms in the leaves that resemble a lot like SDS. That's where we need to start thinking here in Ohio, is it really SDS? And here's the bad news, unfortunately. We know that fields affected with red crown rot in other states where they pull the plants and they actually were able to see that the pathogen that causes red crown rot was there. They also identify the pathogen that causes SDS. So it's not uncommon that we may have both hitting our soybean production. Okay. But that's very characteristic, the symptomology that resembles SDS, or maybe the other ones that I mentioned, Phytophthora or charcoal rot, depending on how severe the root rot was. The plant could dry completely out. Just don't suspect that is another little area that was affected by Phytophthora or charcoal rot. Go there, check that crown area. In moist areas of the field, in areas that are very humid, we may see actually the formation of a fruiting body that causes these fungus that is called perithecia. This is a sexual fruiting body. It's round, are little balls, red, orange in colors. Once you see that, pretty much, it could be diagnosed as red crown rot. Again, we're very happy to help with the diagnosis, with fundings from Ohio Soybean Council and in joint support with United Soybean Board. We will be helping in diagnosing red crown rot this summer. So get your samples, put it on a plastic bag, seal it, get the air off, try to get those samples pretty how they look in that field to the lab, and we will be able to help. We need pretty much all the parts of the plants. We need the root system, the crown area, and the leaves to make an assessment. We will try to isolate the fungus from those tissues to make a confirmation if it's red crown rot. But reach out. We will be working with you to diagnose these diseases.
Yeah, that's such a critical part of any emerging issue, is getting as much information as we can to start understanding what's going on, to be able to get good recommendations back out to the field of how we're going to deal with this. So definitely take advantage of Horacio's offer to help us find this beast.
Yeah, and it's check off funding, so make sure that you take advantage of this. This is work that we are doing for you.
And for those who may be struggling with SDS and SCN, soybean cyst nematode, we still have funding for those samples as well?
Yes, 100%. Again, when you submit that sample, we will confirm if it's SDS fungus or the red crown rot fungus or both. Hopefully not both, but that's a result that the grower will receive. If there's anything else, rhizoc or anything else, that's something that we will also communicate. For SCN, we still receive samples from growers. That's soil samples. So for SCN, soybean cyst nematode, that's a soil sample that can be submitted to the lab, and we process that and we return the numbers of SCNX per 100 cc of soil, cubic centimeters of soil. And lastly, things to keep in mind with red crown rot, again, that kind of differs a little bit from SDS management, is one, rotate to a non-host. And red crown rot pathogen, unfortunately, has a wide host range. So it can affect pretty much multiple and several legumes. So alfalfa, peanuts, to give examples, but then also weeds that are legumes, it will be affected. So grass will be a great way to get away and try to reduce the survival of the pathogen. The pathogen survive producing these microsclerotia. These are hardening structures that can survive in the soil. From the literature, we know that it can survive over 7 years in the field. That's that data that we have. There's going to be more data coming out of Illinois, where they're doing more studies looking into, can you go for 10, can you go for longer times in those fields. So they have historical plots there where they continuously see the survival of the pathogen. So that will be interesting. But we know at least 7 years, maybe more. So rotation to a non-host will help. Again, hopefully with information, talking to your agronomist, that they have been looking at different cultivars. That's where we're going to learn which ones are behaving better and are more resistant to the pathogen. So when we have more information on that, that will be a very important line of defense, selecting your cultivars with resistance when available. Seed treatment is another one. Unfortunately, some of the very good seed treatments for SDS may not be as effective for red crown rot. So pay attention on what's out there that is A, labeled for red crown rot, and B, that we have data showing that it works well. And then cultural practices, right? I mean, avoid very high soil temperatures. Let's try to hit those early days of spring planting. Try to get away from that. Again, more data is needed, and more research that we're doing will further help us understand better the planting date when it comes to managing this disease. We talk about movement of soil. Avoid that as much as you can. We talk about movement of soil in terms of equipment. So if you know you have red crown rot and you went and you work those fields, try to clean as much as you can that equipment before moving to other places.
Or if you buy used equipment,
make sure it's very clean, 100%. And then diagnosis. I mean, it's going to come to know that I actually am dealing with red crown rot. There are multiple tests out there that we are trying to develop faster way of telling if we have red crown rot. There's going to be several labs that are going to try to go through the molecular route faster. As of now, most of those species-specific primers, quote-unquote species-specific, have not shown that specificity. What I mean by this is some tests that will show positive for red crown rot may give us false positive. There are so many organisms in the root system. When we're just trying to hit and clip some of that root tissue and get everything that is out there and say if it's positive for red crown rot, sometimes it's not. So we have received calls last year from, hey, we tested this through a molecular method, DNA extraction method, positive for red crown rot. Can you come and check the field? We couldn't find the pathogen in those fields. And this is good. Again, if you do go and test those fields through those methods, great. If it comes back positive, follow through. Get us out there, send those samples. While you're waiting, while you're making decisions, let's try to get the fungus out of those tissues to make sure that it's actually red crown rot.
Yeah, I think the important thing is you don't have to go this alone. If you do get this disease, make sure you reach out to Horacio's lab, and certainly here to help make those recommendations and how to move forward with it.
100%. And again, like I mentioned at the beginning, nothing to worry about. We have been dealing with soil-borne diseases, and this will be one that we will have to deal with, unfortunately now. But we are actively doing research and learning more. The new technology that is coming out there, we're testing it. We're getting data from Ohio. We're getting data from our collaborators from neighboring states. We're working with our private partners. Such an important relationship to have when it comes to something like this. I mean, we have to be all together here fighting the same enemy in this case, right? And we're doing it. We're doing it with seed companies. We're doing it with companies that want us to test products, and we're evaluating these things to be able to recommend grower what's working.
All right. Well, Horacio, great couple podcasts here. If you missed our last one, he talked about foliar diseases. So we should have you guys covered for whatever you're seeing in the field. Make sure you're getting out there, boots on the ground, seeing what's going on. If you have questions or if you want to do a research trial, just reach out to us or your county educator and we'll get you fixed up. So again, thank you, Horacio.
Yeah, and again, last couple of things: corn newsletter articles, Crop Protection Network website, the SCN Coalition website for SCN specifically. Those are great resources for you out there to learn more about these pathogens and management. And then we want to thank Ohio Soybean Council and United Soybean Board for the support, specifically for helping us diagnose and helping us to work with growers to diagnose red crown rot this season.
Thanks for listening to the Agronomy and Farm Management Podcast. Join us again in 2 weeks for our next episode.